So in this next section, what I want to do is I want to start covering, it'll be our find patterns. Pat Max I'm going to skip because we're going to do Pat Max in the advanced class. So just going to jump right over it. And then talk a little bit about logic, some of the logic functions to decide whether our part's good or bad. So we're going to talk about the find patterns type applications. As part of that, we're going to talk about these parameters that are going to be available in our property sheets, as well as what auto-inserted functions are going to be created from these tools. We're going to not talk about Pat Max at all, and we're also going to talk a little bit about some of the logic statements that we can use to decide whether a part's good or bad. Here is our block inspection. This is what we're trying to inspect. So what we want to do is we want to make sure the block is present. We want to check to see if there's any gouge in the box. We want to make sure that it's of proper width and that we have these holes sitting there. Whenever we're doing a machine vision application, there's certain steps that we usually go through. The first one is analyze the problem. This is where we know what a good part is and what a bad part is, and we start thinking about, okay, what is it that we really want to know? What is it that we really want to do here? What do we care about? What do we not care about? So then after you get through that, then you start the prototyping job. And the prototyping job is where you start putting the tools down. Give me what I want it to be. Am I finding what I expect? Am I identifying where I want to identify? Beautiful. Then what you need to do is build a design and operator interface. You want to say, what is it that I want my user to get access to? Do I want them to be able to tweak anything? Do I want them to be able to see anything? What is it that I want them to have control over? And then finally, you want to complete and deploy, because unless you're a third shift person, chances are you don't want to get called at 2 o'clock in the morning because system went down. The unit just happened to let the magic smoke out. What you're going to want to do is be able to get that next unit, get it up, get it on, and off and running. Minimum downtime. Now what we need to then start thinking about is what tool goes with which. Okay, so to decide whether the part's there or not, we're going to use find patterns, a pattern recognition tool. To determine if the block has that gouge or not, we're going to use extract histogram. To determine that the part is of a given length, we're going to use our find segment tool. And then finally, to make sure those blobs are there, or I should say those holes are there, we're going to use the extract blobs tool. Do we have to use those tools? Could we maybe do other ways of deciding whether things are good or bad here? Sure, yeah. But there's different ways to approach a problem. The reason why we've chosen these tools is because it gives us a chance to really understand the vision tool. Because these are the core vision tools for you to get a grip on. So that you can, when you really understand these, it makes breaking everything else down so much easier. So let's talk a little bit about find patterns. We start with our application with find patterns for two reasons. One is because it's available in all units. Unless you buy Pat Max, you may or may not have it. So this is available in all units. Second reason is because you have your train and your find portions all in one tool. So if I try to do Pat Max right now, I'd have to have two tools to do both the training and the finding part. We haven't even learned about a tool yet. Then I'm going to throw you in the deep end with two tools? No, we're going to start with just one tool first. So we're going to both train and find with that one tool. So here are some applications that find patterns can do. So you might say, well, what does find patterns do? Well, what it's going to do is it's going to give you a part location. It's going to return your row and column of the item that you found. It's also going to give you your orientation relative to what was trained. So however it was trained, that's 0. Then any movement from there will be the change in orientation. As well as scale, I can do plus or minus 10% with my find patterns tool. So whatever it was trained as, that's 100%. And then I can go from 90 to 110% from what I had originally trained it from. The find pattern tool is going to be found underneath our pattern match tools. If you have Pat Max, that'll be in there as well. But what we want to concentrate on is just find pattern. The find pattern is going to have two regions. Unfortunately, you're in spreadsheets, you're not going to see both region at the same time. But it's going to have a model region. Now the model region is going to be around what is that unique item on my part that will be on every single part that I'm trying to find. So that's our model region. And our find region is where inside our field of view do I expect to find that model I just trained, that pattern I just trained. Now why might I have a find region smaller than the full field of view? Less processing time. Because if I were to say find my keys in this room versus find my keys in my jacket, which one's going to take you less time? In my jacket, exactly, because you're only going to look at the jacket, it's either going to be there or not. and then you're going to stop. Well, if you do the room jacket, okay, now let me keep looking, where could it be? So what we want to do is we want to put a comment into our program before we add the tool in. Now, to add a comment to the spreadsheet, it's an apostrophe and then type out whatever you want. If you forget the apostrophe, it will turn red as soon as you're starting to type something in that's not actually a command. So if you try to say find the block, as soon as you say find, it looks great, and you say the, and all of a sudden it starts going red. Because there's no command that says find the. Okay, there's find patterns, there's all kinds, there's find PatMax, lots of finds. But now why do we want to comment? So we know what it is. I barely remembered what I did yesterday, much less 6 months ago. Probably want to make sure that I comment it so when I'm looking at it, I understand what I'm doing there. Another reason is so the people behind you know what you were doing. Now you might say, hey, but it's job security. Yeah, but you always need to get yourself up to the next level. So as soon as someone can do yours, then you can go further. So if you comment, it just makes life a lot easier, and they're not hounding you, every 5 minutes. Well, what were you doing there? What were you doing there? Now what I want to do is I'm going to drop down 2 lines and go over 1 column before I drop the tool in. Do I have to? No, because spreadsheets really doesn't care. But the reason I do it is because to me it looks better. It looks very organized. So that's why I do that. Spreadsheets, once again, doesn't really care. So I'm going to grab my Find Patterns tool, drag it, and drop it over into the spreadsheet. What's going to happen is a property sheet box is going to jump up. And the property sheet box is going to ask you basically some questions about how you want to set up your tool. First thing it's going to ask you about is image. So the image is what image should it be looking at? And by default, what image is it looking at? A0, which is the acquired image from the camera. Okay, that's what it's basically saying, it's acquired image. I could reference something else. I mean, we'll talk about image processing and everything later. I could reference something like that. But right now I'm saying no, the image coming from the camera, that's what I want to use for this tool. Then it's going to ask you about fixturing. We're going to just ignore that for right now. Then it's going to ask you about the model region. So this is where you can go in there and you can set up the model region. Your model settings, I'm going to talk more about model settings in a moment, and then you have your find region. Any of those parameters that have a little plus next to them, if I hit that plus, it expands them. It actually has more details in it. In fact, the details are being written off right to the side here. Okay, so if I open this up, it's going to tell me this is my row, my column, my high, my wide, and my rotation. So if I wanted to, I could actually go in there and type those in if I wanted to. If I already knew what they were ahead of time, I could type them. If I wanted to correct something, I could type it in there. Then how many do I look for? My angle range. So remember when we trained it, that's 0. So we're saying plus or minus how much angle range can that part move within my field of view. Scale tolerance, do I want to use it? Remember I can do plus or minus 10%. So if I check it, it's plus or minus 10%. If not, it means it's expecting it to be 100%. Now if it comes in at 101%, it'll probably still find it. It'll just report it as 100% because you're not looking for scale. Okay, as you start getting further away from 100%, it won't find it. It'll just kind of throw its hands up in the air and say, I don't know what you're trying to look for. Except in confusion, I will confuse you with in a moment. Got a nice little slide for that. And then we have timeout. How long will it waste before it actually boots? So why might I want to have a timeout? So what you might have is you have a certain cycle time you have to maintain. And if all of a sudden this is eating up all your time and everything, now everything's going to get backed up and you're going to have bigger issues. So instead you're saying, okay, I might have a cycle time, let's say our cycle time is 1 second, so 1,000 milliseconds. So I might give this 500 milliseconds to try to find it. If it doesn't find it within 500 milliseconds, forget it. I might get a false reject, okay, because it's going to punt it. It's going to say it's a reject, right? But what is worse, a false reject or a false accept? False accepts are lawsuits for your company. False reject is just money going out the door during the manufacturing process. So although you want to control your false rejects, you always want to err on the side of a false reject when being compared to a false accept. You know, it's better to just say, I don't trust it, and then show was what graphics it'll show you. So when I do my region, okay, I want to set my region around what I'm looking for. In our case, we're going to look for the logo Cognex. Because Cognex is, if you look at both your good and your bad part, it's on both of them. So that's what I'm going to look for is the word Cognex. Now to set up my region, there's a couple of ways that I can do it. One way is to just double click on model region or double click on find region, whichever one I'm trying to set. The other way is to single click on it and then go up there and choose Edit Graphics button, which looks like a square with little pink dots in the corner. Both are going to take you to the same section. And that is, it's going to remove your overlay, it's going to show you your image, and it's going to put an interactive square right in the center of it where you're going to move that to be around what you're looking for. As soon as you say OK to it, then those numbers get fed into that spreadsheet where I could open it up and I could type something in there. So just from your interactive thing, it says, OK, I know where you just placed those points. Here's what it is, and it updates your property sheet. Now, if I open up model settings, it's going to give me a little bit on control over how my model's being trained. One of the things is area versus edge. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. We also have coarseness and accuracy. Once again, I have another slide about it, but it's basically how much time do I want to spend looking at it, and how accurate am I really taking a look at this part. Then we have this offset row and offset column. Now, what we're doing is we're training a model. It's going to be a 2D model. And now we've got to return it back as being a single point. Now, how do we reference a single point from that model? So this is where the offset comes in. By default, the point is going to be relative to the center of your model region, wherever it's found. That's where it's going to be by default. Otherwise, you can adjust that. And your offset row and offset column is basically saying, when you return back what my row and column is from where you found my model, I don't want it to be based off the center of the model region. I want it to be based off like maybe where there's a hole in my model, because maybe that's where the actual robot's going to come down and pick it up. So instead of me doing the offset over on the robot side, I can actually give it the true coordinate points right now, and it says, oh, that's where it is. And it will go and use those coordinate points to pick up the part. Force train, please do not leave force train checked. You will have awesome results. They will be wrong. Because basically you're saying every single time you're acquiring, you're retraining, and then you're finding what you just retrained. So unless you have a blank image, you're going to be like, oh, look, I've got all these great scores. No, you don't. You're just finding what you just thought you found. And then finally, we also have patterns. And patterns is for, if you're using multiple find patterns, it allows for you to use another find patterns with this. Now, your choices are area model and edge model. So what area model does is it does a correlized nonlinear search. It looks pixel by pixel at what you trained it to be and compares it to what it was trained as. So what you had found it to be and what it's trained as, and does a little normalization, meaning it accounts for maybe some fluctuation, kind of your lighting levels a little bit, but just a little. But otherwise, if you have some glare or some shadow in there, it's going to see that as a difference. Going to say, whoa, these pixels don't quite match up with each other. I've got issues here. So where the edge is looking for light to dark transition, and that's where it's training it at. So it's trying to say, hey, as long as I find these light to dark transitions, if I have some shading issues, if I have some glare, I'm still good. As long as I can find my edge, I'm good. Mind you, I'm stating as long as I can find my edge. Because a lot of people get confused here. They're like, oh, but this is how PatMax works. So I don't need PatMax, right? Because this one does edge. This one does edge, but note that I say as long as you find that edge. This one doesn't find the edge as readily as PatMax does. So that's where the power of PatMax comes in. Okay, we'll talk more about PatMax later. So why would I use one over the other? Well, if you have a small region, area is probably better because you probably don't have enough information for edges. Or if you don't have well-defined edges, well, that's a duh moment. Because if you don't have well-defined edges, you probably shouldn't use an edge model. Speed. Your area is going to run much faster than your edge model. But the edge model is great if you're using backlighting, because backlighting gives you nice, great contrast of what your edges are. Not to mention if you have nonlinear lighting changes. So if you have some glare or you have some shadowing, as long as you find the edges, that's what it's looking for. It doesn't matter that you have a glare on it. And then also significant changes in focus and background. Because in my background there, if I did the area, all that background better be the same. But if I'm doing the edge, as long as I find my edge, I could have some spots sitting on my conveyor belt. Who cares? Still works. Then we also have coarseness and accuracy. So the easiest way to explain coarseness is when I'm taking a look at my model in edge mode, how nitpicky do I want to get about every little small detail that I'm training? So if I want it to be fine accurate, I'm looking at details that are about 4 pixels in size. If I'm doing medium, they're probably more 4 to 8 pixels in size. And if I'm looking at coarse, they're probably going to be greater than 8 pixels in size. How little fine of detail on that side of that part that I'm training do I really care about? Now, it usually works in relationship with accuracy, which accuracy is saying, how long should I spend to make sure that I find this where you expect me to find it? Do I want it to be fast? If I want speed, I'm going to have to give up accuracy. If I want it to be very accurate, I'm going to give up speed. Because what we're going to find is in any machine vision application, you're going to need to make this choice. Do I want accuracy or do I want speed? When we release a new product or a new software or something, very often we might tweak our algorithm so we bring up speed and accuracy at the same time. But when you start trying to program your own application, you're going to need to then choose at that point what's more important to you, speed or accuracy, and go from there. So let's say I was looking at the word cognex, and I'm using coarse and fast. So what might happen is I might have the word cotnex come up, and it might still find it. Because if I'm using coarse and fast, what I might be saying is, hey, I'm looking at a piece of paper. There's going to be something written across the top. I don't really care what it is. Just the fact that something's written across the top, I want to find that because maybe I want to use that for fixturing everything else. So kind of tell me where that top is, and I'm good to go. So I've got the speed there. I just don't care that it says particularly cognex, but that it looks something like that. Now, if I reduce it to medium, it's picking up more of the letters here. I might not be able to get by with the word cotnex, but I might be able to get by with the word cunex, because an O and a G is pretty close together, that I might be able to get by with that one. So now we're saying, okay, I want to spend a little bit more time. I want to be a little bit more particular about what I'm looking for, but I still have a little bit of variability in there. And then finally, if I go to fine and accurate, notice that it's looking for every single little character. And you might say, but that's kind of how PatMax works. Well, yes, except for it blows away the speeds on this. Because to turn it onto this, it's going to take a big time hit for you. So, something to think about. Now, we have accept and confusion thresholds. Okay, so let me confuse you with it. So, we really have 2 phases whenever you do define patterns. It goes through the first phase. In the first phase, it uses half-res. So it's using a partial image sitting inside the camera. You don't have to think about it. It does it by default. And then it quickly tries to find any potential candidates that match what you have trained. If they are below the accept threshold, they're thrown out. If they're above the threshold, they're held on. Now it says, okay, how many are you looking for? And if I said I'm looking for 1, and that 1 is above the confusion threshold, I'm done. But let's say I'm looking for 2. So 1 comes in above the confusion threshold, but then 1 comes in between the confusion and the accept threshold. So what's going to happen is that as soon as I don't have how many I'm looking for, or that they fall between the confusion and the accept threshold, I'm going to force it to run again. And this time it's going to be running at full res mode, and it's going to only take a look at candidates between the confusion and acceptance. So we're trying to speed it up a little bit by saying, hey, if you're over confusion, don't bother. But otherwise, it's only going to look in that area right there, and it might bump the score. Because now it's saying, let me take a little closer look. Yeah, this might be a little bit higher of a score, so it might adjust them. So that now at the end, you're going to get a number somewhere between 0 and 100, where 100 was exactly what you trained it to be, and 0 is, I have no clue what you just put in front of the camera. So we're looking for the highest scores. Whichever ones are the highest scores are going to be listed depending on how many you're looking for. If we want it to be the fastest, we tie confusion and acceptance together. That way, as long as you break that score, you're good. Keep going. So you never go into phase 2. You're always in phase 1, which is the fast phase. If you want it to be the most thorough, you tie confusion to 100. That way, you're always forcing it into phase 2 to take a closer look at it, and thus more thorough. Takes more time, but it makes it more thorough. So I'm going to skip over PatMax right now. So whether you use PatMax or fine patterns, you're going to get the same set of auto-inserted functions. Auto-inserted functions are results from the tools that we think most people want access to. It doesn't mean they're the only ones that exist for the tool, especially with PatMax. There's tons of stuff behind the scenes with PatMax. But it's what we think most people want to know. So when you take a look at the tool, you're going to see that it gives you a structure. So anything with this like little character in front of it, that means it's a structure. Normally, if I double click on it, I get the property sheet again, and I can tweak things around. Then what it's going to give me is what index. The index, we are a 0-based index, means our first result will be index 0. So the one with the highest score in this case is going to be index 0. Then it's going to give me my row and my column of it relative to where that offset point is, the angle, the scale, and what my score is. So that's what it comes up with. Now, auto-inserted functions are only created when you originally create the tool. Let me just state this one more time because it's going to bite you with the blob tool. Auto-inserted functions are only created when you originally create the tool. That's when auto-inserted functions are created. If I ask for one result, I go back in and I change it to 3, it will not add the other 2 on there. But if when I originally create the tool, I ask for 3 results, it will show me 3 lines there, index 0, index 1, and index 2. It will show me the top 3 results. Now you might say, what's actually going on underneath it? So if I actually took a look at those cells, okay, and I actually saw what was sitting in the formula editor, this is doing a get row, looking at this structure, looking at this index. So get column, get angle, get scale. You can tell that we really spend a lot of time on trying to make these descriptive. Now let's talk a little bit about mathematical functions. Now in most situations, like something with a find patterns tool, our score is probably going to tell me whether it's successfully found it or not, because I'm getting something from 0 to 100. But some of our other tools, like if I do a measurement tool, it's just going to give me a measurement. So I'm going to need to decide whether that measurement's good or not. So this is where I could use some of our mathematical functions. Now we have a whole set of mathematical functions. We have logic, we have lookup. I like to call lookup tools kind of insight tools because they tend to be functions that were created for insight to make life a lot easier for us, but they weren't sure where to put them, so they threw them inside the lookup functions. We also have math, so if you want to do random or exponential or anything you want to do. We also have statistics and our trigonometry tools. So what we want to concentrate on right now is our logic tools. So let's talk about if. How many people know if, then, else? That is what this is. This is an if, then, else statement. So I have if, open paren, and then what the condition is. If that condition resolves to be true, so that means if this condition resolves to be non-zero, then I'm going to grab what's in my true value. Otherwise, I'm going to grab my false value. So if I were to look at this, I would say if condition, then true value, else false value. That's my if, then, else. So with that said, I have A1 equaling 100, and I have A2 saying if A1 is less than 128, give me the string good, otherwise give me the string bad. What is going to be sitting at A2? Well, is A1 less than 128? So yes, so we're talking bad there. So since this is a false statement, we then grab the false value, and the false value happens to be the string bad. Beautiful. And it's the one that everyone's got to be the same. And this, and that, and this, and that. So every single one of those conditions have to be true. If even one of those conditions is false, it is false. So with that said, we're going to embed it inside an if statement. We're going to say that A1 equals 23, B1 equals 10, and C1 equals 22. So we're going to say D1 equals if and A1 is greater than B1, and A1 is less than C1, give me 1 or negative 1. So what is going to be sitting in D1? Minus 1? Well, let's work it out. Is A1 greater than B1? Yes, it is. 23 is greater than 10. Is A1 less than C1? False. So even if I had more statements right now, I could stop. Because I would say I have one false statement, so it's false. So since I have a false condition, I grab the false value, and that would be negative 1. Because I'm embedded in an if statement. Beautiful. In range. In range is going to ask for what number do you care about? And is it in between the minimum and the maximum number? So with that said, we're still using the same numbers. A1 equals 23, B1 equals 10, C1 equals 22. We're going to say in range C1, A1, B1. Is that true or false? So look at it. So C1, so the value is what? Is 22, right? And then the min value is to 23, exactly. So is 22 between 10 and 23? It's true. So since it's true, guess what's going to be sitting at F1? A 1. Because in this case, we weren't using an if statement. It was by itself. So if it's true, it'll be a 1. If it's false, it'll be a 0. And now not. Everyone loves not. Not makes true false, makes false true, makes a non-zero value 0 and makes a 0 value 1. Just inverts whatever the logic is. So with that said, if I say B7 is 92 and I say D1 equals if not B7 greater than 95, 1, 0, what's going to be sitting at D1? Well, is B7 greater than 95? It's false, but we not it. It's true, so you grab the true value. The true value is a 0. It depends on your placement, not the value. Okay? Because for some people, bad is 1, good is 0, because that would be a jettison. So now we're going to try this. We're going to say A2 equals 6 and B2 equals 244.5. Who wants to say 6? Okay, because talk it out. Is A2 greater than 7? Correct. It's not greater than 7, so this is a false statement. So I'm going to grab the false value. So that's going to be low. Perfect. What about the next one? So it's a true statement, but then we make it false, so we have to grab the false value, and that's going to be fail. Who wants to go for D1? It's a negative 1. Because is A2 greater than 5? And is A2 less than B2? So that's true. So all this is true. So we grab the true value, which is negative 1. Beautiful. Who wants to do the last one? So you have it in range, but now you're not. So what's going to happen? So what's going to be sitting on the spreadsheet? If that's all you have there and you don't have an if statement, what's going to be sitting on the spreadsheet is a 0. Exactly. So hopefully that's helped you a little bit about what's going on with your logic. Okay. So how do you enter the functions? Well, like I was saying at lunch today, if you've been doing this for a while, you'll probably just type in IF and open paren and save yourself a ton of time. Otherwise, you can go over to the palette, open up mathematics, open up logic, grab your if function, grab it over and drop it in, and now you're still at the point of if open paren. So now you got to say what your condition is, comma, your true statement, comma, your false statement, and then end it up. Beautiful. So we talked a little bit about property sheets, how it made it very easy for us to deal with parameters in a function. We talked a little bit about the structures. We said that anything that had that structure sign is probably something that we can double click and it brings up a parameter sheet. One thing I didn't go over is those auto-inserted functions. If I removed all those functions to the right of it, other than the structure, are those functions gone for good? Still in the structure, okay? But they're not seen on the spreadsheet. But if I get rid of the structure, what's my option? Control Z or begin it again, okay? Because as soon as you get rid of the structure, that's gone now. We talked a little bit about find patterns. We said that it's the tool that actually does the training as well as the finding within a single tool, and that we have a certain set of auto-inserted functions that are created at the time that the tool is created. Okay? These are what we think most people want to see, but it doesn't mean that that's all the tool has to offer. And then we talked a little bit about the math functions that we can use to help with our decisions about the inspection. In particular, we talked about the if and not and in range, but of course there are a few more. You've got your ORs, and I think there's a couple of bit-wise ones that if you need individual bits, you can look at them. So, okay, so let's try this out. Now, the beginning of your lab, okay, has stuff with the logic. I'm going to bypass that logic stuff because I'm going to end up doing it at some point inside our lab. I think the only thing I do want to kind of show you guys right now is in case I did an embedded one. So let me just quickly just throw, let's say I grabbed an if statement, and then let's say I wanted to do an and statement. Well, as you see here, I can't go grab and pull the and in. Okay? I'm trying to embed these statements, but it's not offering it to me. Now, what I could do is I could type in and, but you might say, but I don't know what choices I have here. Well, there's this little f of x. It's a function key. And if I click on that, then what that will do is that will now give me, notice I don't, some things are grayed out, but now in my mathematics, inside my logic, I have an and now I can embed the ands that way. So you can always use that function key if you don't want to type things in and you want to start embedding things. And it kind of lets you know what you can embed. Okay, that's all. Now, a lot of people say I put in equals. For you Excel people, notice that our equals is already implicit. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down to B10. That's because I'm going to create a user interface on tomorrow in this area. Do I have to? No. Truth is, spreadsheet really doesn't care. I'm just doing it because, well, that's what the labs say to do. So that's what I'm doing. Okay. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to add a comment at B10. So I'm going to put an apostrophe, and I'm going to say find the block. Okay. I never can spell the correctly. I don't know what my problem is. I'm going to go ahead and accept it. And then what I might want to do is give it a little bit of backfill. Maybe make it green. Bing. So now it pops a little bit. Okay, I kind of know, okay, this is my area for finding the block. Then what I want to do is I want to go over one column and down 2 rows, because this is where I'm going to put the tool. Do I have to? Nope. Once again, it really doesn't matter. But I find it aesthetically pleasing to do it this way. Okay, I like a little indentation because then I'm thinking anything in this area of find block, that all has to do with finding the block. I'm dropping down an extra row here because I'm going to have auto-inserted headers, and I want to make sure I see them. Okay, so what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to go over to Pattern Match, grab my Find Patterns tool, and drag and drop that into my application. So as I start going down the property sheet, I'm just going to do this in order. So what image am I going to use? A0. It's kind of a trick question. There's no other image on this, but it's going to be A0. Exactly, the acquired image from the camera. I haven't told you guys a lick about fixturing. This is kind of a trick question too, but I'm going to leave fixturing alone. My model region. Okay, so this is going to be what I'm looking for. So I can either single click and go up here to say edit graphic, or I can just double click on it and it brings me out to my image with this little changeable box here. So I can grab the corners, move it around. If I need to rotate it, I can kind of rotate it. Okay. Sometimes if I'm kind of like this, but I'm like, ooh, let me try to get a little bit better. What I can do is I can kind of use my arrow keys at this, even though it's not letting me be very nice with it. Come on. There we go. So sometimes if you need kind of finite type change, you can get into it from here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say OK. And if you take a look at what's going on behind it, you can kind of see that my C is, the word cognix is kind of being outlined. If I kind of dig in a little bit, there's a couple little places that I kind of question here. Down here and everything. But this is fine patterns. It's okay. It'll do from what I'm doing. Now, if I take a look at what's going on with my model settings, well, the reason I got the edge is because the default is edge model. Okay, that's neat. I'm just using medium, coarseness, and accuracy. That's cool. I'm trying to balance between accuracy and speed. And my offset. Now, I'm not sure if you guys, probably not. There's a little blue dot right here. Because remember I said when it reports where it finds the point, it's going to be the middle of the model region. So the middle of the model region's right here, but let's say I don't want it to be. Okay? What I can do is I can say, go to my offset row, and notice how it turned red here, and I'm going to say edit graphic. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag it to maybe be the center of the O, because maybe that's where I care for it. So now as soon as I put it there, now everything that it reports is going to be relative to where that point got put. Now it's telling me it just went, -5 in rows and -174 in columns. That's just so it knows how to adjust when it finds that center point. Okay. Everything else looks good here. Beautiful. Now what I need to do is I need to do my find region. So I'm going to say find region. Let me pop this back out to be everything. So what I need to do is I need to make my region contains the word cognix. Now maybe I'm just going to do it up here. Because if it's any lower, outside my field of view, I'm not going to let it rotate 180 degrees. And, if it's too far over one side or the other, I'm going to throw it out anyway. So maybe I just keep it to keep up the speed and everything, I can put it right there. So if I say OK now all of a sudden you've got that crosshair. And the crosshair is being drawn right where that point is. Okay, right where the offset point is. So how many am I looking for? Just one. Just one word cognix. My angle range, plus or minus 15%, that works for me. Scale tolerance. My part's not going to be changing scale. I mean, there might be a little small tremor there. I don't care. If I say scale tolerance, it's going to take more time because it's going to tell me exactly what it sees it to be, but that's not something that concerns me. I'm going to leave my accept threshold and my confusion threshold set to the default. I'm going to leave the timeout set to 5 seconds. And now my show. Hide all just means I'll see the graphics if I'm offline and on the tool. Otherwise, when I'm online or off the tool, do I want to see the result graphics only, which is just the crosshair, or do I want to see the input and result graphics, which is the crosshair and the find region? Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and choose the input and the result graphics right now and say OK. So now, like if I put my overlay back on, you can see that it finds my part behind there. Now, let's go ahead and go online because I've already switched this to be continuous. And you can see that I have some numbers changing down there. Okay? In fact, if I turn this off, let's see if I can move this. Got a little bit of a delay here. We know that the 7000 in continuous mode has a bit of a delay. Okay, so it's moving with it. Beautiful. Now, what happens if I start doing? Uh-oh. What's wrong with this? This is more than 15 degrees. In fact, if I put this here. Now, there's one thing I want to do here just to make things a little bit easier for you guys to see. It's not something inside your lab. It's something we kind of teach you in this class. I'm just going to go Format, Format Cells. I'm going to turn my graphics up to 4, and that's just to make my box behind my overlay a little bit more able to be seen. Yes, more defined, because then if I find it, you can see, boom, there's my cross. Okay? So yes, if I go to here, I've got -15, all of a sudden pound errors. Okay, it comes back, -15. I can move over to here. Let's go, oh, too far. Okay. Now let's see what happens if I start doing this. Oh. Heck, yay! What's wrong with that? Exactly, and in this case, it would be my region of interest. Exactly. But very similar concepts, okay? So now if I pull it back in, now let's see if I can do something that, okay, yeah, this one right here. Okay. Now, if you were to look at this, you could say, that doesn't look quite right. Doesn't look quite lined up. It looks like I'm going angle right there. To me, I can look at this and say, that doesn't look like where I put my point. In fact, if I straighten it up, that's where my point should be. But if I go to about right here, all of a sudden, it's not looking that great. Okay? Now, you might say, well, what's really going on? Well, that's still not as bad as I want it to be. There, that's pretty bad. Okay. So when I take a look at this, I can see this is smushing down a little bit. But if I take a look, notice what my score is. My score is only 63 there because it's having a little problem. First, the main reason is because I'm clipping on my angle. Okay, and that's where I wanted to set this just enough that score goes down. It thinks it's kind of finding it, but it's pushing things out the way. So what I can do is I'm going to go offline for a moment. I'm just going to jump over an extra column here, and I'm just going to put the comment logic. So an apostrophe, write the word logic, maybe give it a little bit of background, give it a little bit of blue back there. And what I want to do is I want to do some type of logic statement that lets me know whether it's of a good score, or whether the score's gone down so much. Now, I could increase my accept threshold. That would be one easy thing for me to do, but here's another way of doing it. So what logic statement would be good for me to check to make sure my score is over a certain number? In range could be. If is the one I was thinking of. The reason why I would use if over an in range here is because you can't go over 100. So you've only got one edge to go on. So I went down to my mathematics, my logic. I grabbed my if statement, dragged it up here. Now the first thing it's asking for is the condition. So I'm going to choose my score. Now this is I-12, not 12. It's actually an I there. And I'm going to say, is it greater than, I would even say 85. Yeah, I'm got to be at least a B. If it's not a B, chuck that baby. Want nothing to do with it. Okay, then I'm going to do a comma. what do I want to be if it's over 85? A 1, yeah. I'm going to give the number 1. Now, if you guys want to put good in quotes, that's fine, but also give me a 1 or a 0, because I'm going to use the 1s or the 0s later for giving communication outside. Now, if it's not over 85, what should it be? A 0. Now, if you're OCD, or CDO to put them in the right order, you can end the parentheses right here if you want. Otherwise, if you just say OK, it'll automatically add their parentheses for you. So right now, it's giving me a 0. Is that correct? Yeah. So let's see if I just straighten this out, do another acquisition. And sure enough, now it's giving me a 1. Beautiful. The score is right at 100. And so now as I run it, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And then if it goes outside, goes to 0, comes back inside, and it's happy. Let's have you guys try it.